Imagine stumbling upon a forgotten manuscript. Real window into a world long past, filled with accounts of distant lands, unique customs, powerful rulers. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
It really is quite something.
We've received these fascinating excerpts from the Boxer Codex bookie, which is, well, it's a truly remarkable historical document. It gives this rare and intricate look into societies across Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, right around the late 16th century.
A really specific snapshot in time.
Yeah, and it's not just a dry list of facts. It's packed with observations on culture, how people were governed, daily life. It's a real treasure trove.
Absolutely.
So our deep dive today, our mission, is all about pulling out the most compelling insights from this amazing material. We'll journey through, diverse cultural practices, societal structures, the political dynamics described in his pages.
But also, and this is key,
Right, just as crucially, we'll examine the very lens through which these observations were made. Because history, it's always interpreted, isn't it?
always, you can't escape the observer.
So get ready for some genuinely surprising facts and perspectives. Things that might actually challenge how you think about the past. Okay, so let's unpack this right from the start.
Right.
The source material itself, it really stresses how important it is to approach these historical documents critically. And I think that's just, well, it's a crucial foundation for any deep dive into the past, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's the essential starting point.
Even as we're learning about these incredibly rich cultures, we're constantly reminded, consider the author's viewpoint, the context they were writing in.
Precisely. Take, for instance, how the Codex depicts Visayan society. It certainly highlights a rich diversity, a real depth in their customs and social structures, no question about that. However, the source material itself urges us, pushes us to question if this portrayal, which is based on historical documents and narratives from that time, might be influenced by the author's own biases. Or maybe just a limited viewpoint shaped by their own cultural background.
Right, they're seeing it through their own filter.
Exactly. And this brings up a really important question for any historical analysis. How do we actually pull out what we might consider fact from what is inherently perspective? It's a constant kind of nuanced dance, isn't it, between what was recorded and the motivations or, the built-in frameworks of the person doing the recording.
Oh, yeah.
We're not just reading history, we're reading an account of history, a version.
That point about bias really stands out, especially when the sources specifically mention cultural misinterpretation and Eurocentrism, particularly when they discuss indigenous practices like those concerning the Chamorros, who are also called the Ladrones in the Codex. It's such a powerful reminder that historical accounts are rarely, if ever, neutral.
It's a really critical detail provided right there in the source material. And what's fascinating is the explicit acknowledgement, the text itself points out, that the author's representation of these indigenous practices might stem from a distinctly Eurocentric perspective. And this framework, this European way of seeing things, could potentially lead to misconstruing the true meaning, the real significance of rituals and beliefs within their own cultural contexts.
Can you give an example?
Well, sure. Imagine a European observer seeing a spiritual ceremony. They might instinctively interpret it through the lens of their own Christian faith, or maybe their lack of it, right? Instead of trying to understand its animistic or ancestral roots from within that culture's perspective.
Right, imposing their own system onto it.
Exactly. The source flat out states that this viewpoint warrants scrutiny. It reminds us that histories are often told through a very specific lens, especially during periods of colonial encounters. A dominant culture often interprets and sometimes fundamentally misunderstands or even just dismisses the nuances of another culture. And this isn't just about making a simple mistake in observation. It's about an inherent, often unconscious framework of understanding that shapes the whole narrative.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening? As we engage with these old texts and try to learn about these incredible societies, how do we, navigate this built-in bias when we're trying to get accurate information?
It means exercising critical thinking profoundly. The source explicitly mentions that oral traditions, which are incredibly crucial for understanding the cultural histories in many of these societies, can vary significantly in interpretation compared to what was written down.
Okay, so the written word isn't the whole story.
Not at all. And these oral traditions also might not align neatly with Western scholarly frameworks, which, often prioritize written records above all else. This difference, this disparity, it reflects the vital need for a multifaceted approach to understanding history.
So looking beyond just the text itself.
Precisely. It's not just what was observed and written down by the European author, but how it was understood, how it was filtered through that observer's own worldview. And importantly, what might have been lost or distorted in that translation process. When you're reading these accounts, you're not just learning about the people being described, you're also learning about the observer themselves and the limitations of their era's understanding.
That's a great point. It's like looking at a painting.
Exactly. It's like looking at a painting and trying to understand not only the subject, but also the style, the intent of the artist, and how that artistic lens shapes what you ultimately see. Our aim here is to try and peel back those layers, get as close as we possibly can to the authentic experiences and beliefs of the people described, while always remembering that the Codex is a representation. It's not a perfect mirror.
Right. Okay, so having discussed that crucial lens, the way we need to view these accounts, let's now shift our gaze to what was actually observed. Specifically, let's look at the formidable power of imperial China, as it's detailed in Chapter 18 of the Codex. What really jumped out at me from the source was this description of the emperor, rarely leaving his palace.
Yeah.
It paints such a vivid picture, doesn't it? A monarch so exalted, so, I guess, sacred, that direct public interaction was almost non-existent.
Indeed, it's a really striking image of, well, imperial majesty and control. The Chinese imperial ceremony summary that's mentioned, it describes these public appearances as truly rare occasions, like incredibly rare.
Wow.
And when the emperor did appear, his public presence was highly, highly controlled, always accompanied by officials known as mandarins, whose positions were strictly based on their rank within that incredibly intricate imperial bureaucracy. This rigid protocol, it signifies a really deeply rooted societal structure, one that valued reverence, proper order, and the meticulous maintenance of a very specific image of almost divine authority. The emperor wasn't just a ruler, he was often considered the son of heaven, a kind of cosmic pivot point.
Right.
And so his interactions had to be carefully choreographed to reflect that connection to the divine. This ritualistic distance, it was fundamental to his power.
What does that suggest about leadership at the time, though? An emperor who rarely shows his face to his people, relying so heavily on intermediaries. It almost feels like, I don't know, deliberate distancing, but maybe it hints at something more complex under the surface, too.
It does. That highly controlled public appearance, paradoxically, it emphasizes something really crucial. The inherent fragility, the precariousness of power, even absolute authority.
How so?
Well, while it projected might and mystery, it also suggests that such absolute authority could be laden with insecurity, maybe even vulnerability. This distancing might have been intended to amplify his mystique and power, right? Make him seem otherworldly, unassailable.
Makes sense.
But it also indicates a deep-seated need to manage public perception very, very carefully, which hints at underlying challenges to that authority, or perhaps internal instabilities.
Okay.
For instance, the Codex, through Rada's account, elaborates further on China's governance. It describes this vast kingdom divided into 15 provinces, each with distinct administrative structures, some governed by audiences, others by viceroys.
That's huge.
It is, and it highlights the immense logistical and administrative challenge of governing such a sprawling empire, a huge population spread across so many cities and towns. So the emperor's reliance on this hierarchical network of loyal yet potentially self-serving officials like the mandarins was absolutely essential to maintain control and order across that vast territory.
So a mistake anywhere could cause problems.
Exactly. Any misstep in that delicate balance could lead to internal unrest or even direct challenges to the throne, which just underscores the fragility that existed even amidst all that grandeur.
Okay, fascinating. Now, moving east from China, the Codex introduces us to Kubo-sama, the ruler of Japan. And he sounds like a figure straight out of an epic saga, honestly. His story is one of, well, loyalty, revenge, and ultimately absolute power forged through sheer will and military might.
Kubo-sama's ascent to power, it's summarized in Chapter 38, and it is indeed quite dramatic. It's deeply rooted in the complex feudal loyalties and rivalries of that period in Japan, the Sengoku period. He initially served under the formidable Oda Nobunaga, who was this powerful daimyo aiming to unify Japan. But after Nobunaga was unexpectedly murdered by his nephew, Akechi Mitsuhide.
A classic betrayal story.
Totally. Kubo-sama acted swiftly. He avenged his lord's death, defeated the nephew, and claimed dominion over Nobunaga's vast lands. But he didn't stop there.
Hmm.
He then relentlessly expanded his rule, conquering independent kingdoms that previously weren't under tribute, ultimately becoming, as the text says, an absolute ruler of numerous kingdoms.
Wow.
This narrative, it strikingly demonstrates a clear ambition for consolidation, for absolute authority. It's a pattern you see with powerful individuals seizing and expanding control in what was a very fragmented and volatile landscape.
So a turbulent time.
Absolutely. It speaks to a period where military prowess, strategic alliances, and frankly, ruthless decisiveness were absolutely paramount for establishing and maintaining power. His story is really a testament to the dynamic and often brutal nature of political power in 16th century Japan.
And we see similar ambition, perhaps even on a grander scale, in other figures mentioned in the Codex, like Kokondono. It really feels like this era was just marked by these powerful rulers, constantly vying for dominance, expanding their reach beyond their traditional borders.
Yeah, absolutely. Kakundono, who's mentioned specifically in the context of military ambitions, really represents this regional struggle for supremacy. The Codex details how he expanded his territory by invading Korea and then exacting tributes, purely due to his immense power and military strength.
Just taking what he wanted.
Pretty much. The text explicitly states he even prepared significant military resources, including thousands of troops and ships, with the aim, apparently, of invading China itself.
Invading China, that's
Audacious. Incredibly audacious. It reveals a regional landscape shaped profoundly by these powerful figures vying for control and tribute, where military might wasn't just a defensive measure, it was the primary means of achieving broad political objectives. It wasn't merely about internal governance, it was about projecting power across borders, establishing a vast sphere of influence through military strength and economic extraction, via tribute. This constant struggle for dominion truly defined much of the political interplay in the region at that time. And the Boxer Codex also mentions another figure, Pakabundono. He's described as having political acumen, strategic abilities, but also indulging in personal excesses like maintaining numerous wives and women just for pleasure, surrounded by luxury.
interesting detail.
It is, because while it seems maybe trivial, it offers a glimpse into the personal lives and potential weaknesses of these powerful figures. It shows that even these, absolute rulers were still human, sometimes prone to vices that could potentially distract from their leadership or maybe even undermine them.
Okay, shifting our focus now to Southeast Asia. The chapter on Brunei gives us this really intricate look into its structure. It reflects a society deeply steeped in tradition, but also facing its own unique complexities, especially with a diverse population.
Brunei is indeed described with remarkable detail in the Codex. It highlights its intricate geographical setting, which likely played a role in its strategic importance, access to waterways and trade routes. The Codex delves into its complex social structures, its unique governance, established legal systems, and distinct cultural practices. It's portrayed as a society marked by the complexities of its diverse population, which highlights how deeply ingrained tradition coexisted with various cultural elements and influences within its borders.
So no, not monolithic at all.
Not at all. It wasn't just a simple kingdom, it was clearly a multi-layered society, suggesting a rich historical development and diverse influences shaping its character. And interestingly, its military structure also allowed for, as the text puts it, quick mobilization for military action.
So they were ready to fight.
Seems so, and they utilized bows as a primary weapon. This indicates a sophisticated readiness for both defense and offense, which would have been crucial in such a volatile regional environment. It really highlights Brunei's capacity to protect its intricate traditions and its economic interests.
Siam, on the other hand, sounds like a kingdom in flux. Navigating a precarious political situation even while it seems to be thriving economically, it presents this fascinating duality, doesn't it? Internal vulnerability, external prosperity.
Yes, the source paints a really vivid picture of shifting political dynamics in Siam. It was once an expansive empire, apparently, but at the time the Codex was written, it's notably under the rule of an aging king who is explicitly backed by the Burmese.
Backed by the Burmese, that's significant.
It is. That external support suggests either a potentially weakened internal position or perhaps just a complex web of regional alliances that Siam had to rely upon. And there are also clear internal tensions mentioned regarding royal succession. The king's son is actively seeking power.
Classic succession struggles.
Exactly, which further complicates the political landscape and suggests potential instability, maybe even internal strife brewing. Yet, despite these political challenges, these undercurrents of succession battles, the presence of a well-organized customs office is noted, where ships are meticulously assessed and taxed. This signifies a structured, formalized economic system that was clearly crucial for this powerful trading hub.
So, business as usual despite the politics.
It seems that way. This dual reality, political fragility, and economic robustness makes Siam a particularly interesting case study in the Codex. It showcases a kingdom that could be simultaneously strong in commerce, yet potentially vulnerable in its internal power structure. And the source also notes Siam's agricultural productivity, especially its abundant rice.
Why, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, and it was vital for trade. It didn't just satisfy local needs, it became a major export, supplying even powerful kingdoms like Cambodia. This significantly enhanced Siam's stature and economic influence in the wider region.
Okay, so we've explored the big picture, the political landscapes, the grand structures of these kingdoms. Let's now delve into the everyday, the very fabric of life for the people within them. Starting with marriage and family. The Codex revealed some incredibly varied customs across these cultures.
It really does.
For instance, in Tagalog culture, marriage practices involve something called aras, a symbolic gesture expressed through coins.
Yes, the aras. Let's maybe clarify that a bit for listeners. In Tagalog culture, aras refers to this deeply symbolic gesture. Typically, the groom presents a small number of coins, often 13, specifically to the bride during the wedding ceremony.
Okay, what did it symbolize?
It represented his promise to support her and their future family financially, but it also symbolized their shared prosperity, the resources they would pool together. It wasn't just a dowry paid to the family, it was more of a mutual commitment of wealth and well-being within the marital bond itself.
Interesting distinction. And the Codex also mentions that divorces among the Tagalogs are facilitated flexibly. That sounds quite modern, almost. Certainly a contrast to many historical norms where divorce was rare or practically non-existent.
It truly is striking. The source highlights this surprising flexibility. Divorce could apparently be initiated by either party for various reasons, which indicates a really different understanding of marital commitment and maybe social harmony than was common in, say, contemporary Europe. And what's particularly fascinating here is the detail given on children, which highlights really complex social stratification, even within families.
How so?
In some of the indigenous societies described, if a free individual married a slave, or vice versa, the status of their children was actually divided. The firstborn child would be free, the next one would be enslaved, and then this order would alternate for any subsequent children.
Wow. That's incredibly specific.
Isn't it? It speaks to profoundly intricate social stratification and inheritance systems, where even the status of one's own offspring was meticulously tied to the marital status of the parents. It reveals a highly structured society with very clear lines between freedom and servitude, passed down through generations. It indicates that social status wasn't just about wealth, it was a deeply embedded aspect of their legal and cultural framework.
And the Moros, they had their own unique practices mentioned, like polygamy being permissible for men, which again shows a completely different social structure around family units compared to what we might expect.
Yes, polygamous practices were allowed for men among the Moros. This likely reflected a combination of perhaps religious custom and also practical considerations, like forming alliances between families or accumulating wealth and status through multiple family lines.
Right.
However, the source also reveals a darker, more difficult side to their social norms. It states that unmarried women face social stigma if they bear children, leading to infanticide in such cases.
Oh, that's sobering.
It is. It's a really sobering detail that highlights the stark social pressures and the severe consequences within these communities for breaking traditional norms around procreation and family. It showcases a rigid adherence to certain moral codes and the severe societal judgments that could follow transgressions. It reminds us of the harsh realities and complexities of some historical social systems where communal honor and strict rules could, in extreme circumstances, override individual welfare.
The Codex also mentions specific rituals for pregnant women, which suggests a deep cultural investment in, the continuation of family lines and the well-being of the unborn. It sounds like every life stage had its own set of customs.
Indeed, it really speaks to a very holistic view of life, doesn't it? Pregnant women followed these unique customs concerning diets and taboos. These were specifically aimed at protecting purity, ensuring fertility, and promoting a safe delivery.
So not just superstition.
No, these practices weren't just superstitions in their eyes. They were fundamental elements of cultural identity and communal well-being. They reflected a profound connection between the physical body, the spiritual realm, and the future of the community itself. They really illustrate a deep integration of ritual and belief into every significant life stage, right from the earliest moments of life's creation through to its conclusion.
Okay, so beyond the family unit, the spiritual world seems to be incredibly central to these cultures, really permeating daily life. For the Tagalogs, for example, elaborate rituals for the deceased involved feasting, offerings to spirits they called anitos,
Danito.
songs, dances, even animal sacrifices led by priests or priestesses. It sounds like a really vibrant, all-encompassing spiritual life, very different from, say, modern secular views.
It absolutely was. And let's maybe clarify Anitos a bit more. These were essentially ancestral spirits or nature deities. They were venerated by the Tagalogs as powerful forces that could influence daily life, health, fortune, pretty much everything. And these priests and priestesses, who are often described as effeminate in the text, held incredibly crucial roles. They were the mediators between the spiritual and the physical worlds. Their duties weren't just limited to death rituals. They included conducting various ceremonies for births, harvests, illnesses. They healed the sick through spiritual means and generally guided the community through all significant life events.
So they held a lot of influence.
Huge influence. Their authority wasn't just religious, it was profoundly social and spiritual. Now, while their healing rituals were based on the belief that illness often stemmed from spiritual causes, involving prayers and offerings to appease angry spirits, the source also notes, quite fascinatingly and, well, humanizingly, that some fraudulent practices existed within their culture.
Even back then.
Exactly. It's this tiny detail, but it shows that even within deeply spiritual systems, human fallibility, maybe opportunism, perhaps even early forms of charlatanism could exist. It adds a layer of realism.
What about the famous Maganito rituals? They sound like these grand community affairs, really central to their identity.
The Maganito rituals among the Tagalogs were indeed central to their animistic belief system. They were these elaborate communal events involving music, dance, and offerings, primarily directed towards the ancestral spirits, the Anitos. These rituals signified a deep reverence for their ancestors, who were believed to continue influencing the living. And also for a creator deity, Bathala, who was seen as overseeing the cosmos. These ceremonies demonstrated a profound, active effort to communicate with and seek favor from these spiritual entities, particularly for good health, successful harvests, general prosperity.
So very practical aims, too.
Very practical aims. They weren't just passive observances. They were active engagements designed to influence fate and well-being, and they powerfully reinforced communal bonds and a shared cosmology, a shared understanding of how the world worked. It's a really vivid example of how deeply interconnected their daily lives, their social structure, and their spiritual beliefs were. The unseen world was actively shaping the seen world for them.
Now, the Chinese religious landscape, as described in the Codex, sounds equally rich and intricate. You mentioned deities for everything from the earth beneath their feet to the cosmos itself. It's like a pantheon governing every aspect of existence, from the personal right up to the imperial level.
It truly is presented as a comprehensive system. The Chinese worship their ancestors as a fundamental practice, believing strongly in filial piety and this continuous connection between the living and the dead. That was foundational. Beyond this, they considered many traditional beliefs divine, forming a complex system of reverence and cosmic order. You have figures like Tudi Gong, for instance. He's described as the god of the earth, but not just abstractly. He was also the advocate of cattle, the healer of both wild and domestic animals.
Very specific roles.
Very specific, very practical. It highlights a localized spirituality where blessings for harvests and protection for livestock were sought directly from the land itself, often at local shrines. This kind of stands in contrast to the more overarching philosophical principles embodied by figures like Lao Jun, who's described as the supreme god within certain Taoist traditions. That suggests a grander, more cosmic level of order operating alongside the local beliefs.
Right.
Then you have figures like Tianzun and Hamtam associated with binding demons. They symbolize cosmic justice and this ongoing struggle against malevolent forces that could disrupt harmony. And Chimbu and Kwanya act as guardians or protectors, safeguarding the community and embodying themes like selflessness and dedication to the common good. These narratives, taken together, they underscore these broad themes of sacrifice, dedication, selflessness, commitment to the greater good. They illustrate a profound belief in divine oversight and cosmic justice that seemed to permeate their society, from the highest emperor right down to the simplest farmer. It speaks to a deep philosophical and moral framework underpinning their religious practices.
And it seems like nature itself played a big role in spiritual understanding, too, with omens providing direct guidance from the cosmos or the environment.
Absolutely. The source mentions how certain omens, like the presence or maybe the behavior of specific birds in China, could be interpreted as indicators of future events, like signaling many wars or, conversely, portending great peace.
Wow, reading the signs.
Exactly. It suggests a widespread reliance on natural signs for predicting the future and guiding significant societal and personal decisions. And similarly, the Cagayan people, who are described as having this deep connection to nature, also interpreted omens from birds. This practice suggests a profound reverence for nature's signs and also a pragmatic approach to incorporating them into daily life and important decisions, like whether to embark on warfare or plan travels. This worldview really highlights how humans felt intimately connected to and guided by the natural world around them, which is, quite a contrast to more anthropocentric views that place humanity somehow separate from or above nature.
Okay, let's shift gears now to how these societies actually sustain themselves economically. Moving from spiritual beliefs to, well, material survival, the description of Siam's economy really jumps out as being a powerful and prosperous trading hub.
Siam is indeed described as abundantly fertile, capable of producing an excess of food, particularly rice, which was, of course, a crucial commodity in the region. This surplus didn't just feed its own population, it fueled extensive trade with neighboring regions.
Rice as a major export.
A major export. And beyond agriculture, Siam was also rich in other valuable natural resources. Things like indigo used for dyes, gunpowder, which was essential for military endeavors back then, and sappanwood, a valuable timber. This bounty attracted extensive trade from various Southeast Asian territories. The text mentions a vast interchange of goods with China and Japan.
So a real crossroads.
Absolutely. It paints this picture of a vibrant, resource-rich economy that was clearly central to regional commerce, underscoring its strategic importance and its prosperity, rooted in both its agricultural and natural wealth. And as we touched on earlier, its customs office was instrumental in regulating and, importantly, profiting from this extensive trade, demonstrating a pretty sophisticated economic infrastructure for the time.
And how about the Cagayan people and their environment? Their relationship with the land sounds particularly deep, almost sacred in a way.
The province of Cagayan, which is characterized by the Tado River flowing north to south and numerous estuaries, was described as incredibly fertile. And the indigenous people there exhibited this profound connection with their environment through what sound like highly sustainable agricultural practices. They carefully cultivated crops that were adapted to the seasonal cycles, ensuring both nourishment for their community and, it seems, a deep respect for the land that sustained them. But what's particularly interesting is that while the province was reported to have gold mines...
Gold.
Right. The locals were apparently not open about the locations of their gold mines to Spanish settlers.
Our move, probably.
Very likely. It indicates a very protective stance over their valuable resources, a clear awareness of the potential for exploitation from outsiders. And interestingly, their wealth was perceived not just through material possessions like gold, but also through something called bulagani.
Bulagani.
What's that? The text describes them as specific types of precious stones that were highly valued by the Cagayan people. This highlights a broader definition of value, one that went beyond simple monetary terms. It emphasized cultural significance and intrinsic worth alongside material wealth.
Fascinating. And the Moros, too, were known for their distinct economic activities and cultural traits, especially their craftsmanship, right?
Yes, the Moros were described as skilled artisans and also astute merchants. They were adept at both trading and creating intricate metal pieces, things like weapons, but also decorative items. They typically settled near water bodies, which was likely a strategic choice to facilitate their extensive commercial activities and maritime trade routes. And they maintained a culture that was deeply centered around commerce. This focus on trade, combined with their artisan skills, highlights a sophisticated economic approach. It demonstrates their self-sufficiency and their crucial role in the regional economy.
And didn't the source mention something about literacy?
Yes, interestingly, the source mentions they had a developed writing system, suggesting a culture that appreciated expression and literacy. And it specifically notes this was especially among women.
Wow, especially among women. That's significant.
It really is. It's a significant detail indicating perhaps a higher degree of female literacy or involvement in written communication and record keeping than might be commonly assumed for that period. It offers a really fascinating glimpse into their societal norms around education and intellectual engagement.
Okay, so the Codex definitely doesn't shy away from detailing the military aspects of these kingdoms either. It paints a vivid picture of a time marked by both defense and aggression. Brunei, for example, you mentioned, had a system of quick mobilization for military action and used bows. Sounds like they were always ready for conflict.
They certainly seemed prepared. The Codex describes Brunei's military as highly organized, capable of rapidly mustering forces when needed. This quick mobilization indicates a well-structured defense system, which would have been crucial for maintaining sovereignty in a region clearly prone to conflict. Their primary use of bows as a weapon suggests maybe a focus on ranged combat, perhaps in naval engagements or defending fortifications. We also hear about the military capabilities of Tabin, another power mentioned, indicating a structured defense system where the king had direct control over all subjects, rather than relying on a fragmented feudal system for raising troops.
Centralized control.
Right. And some groups, like the Dan Shui described as an independent kingdom next to Keelung, were recognized for their formidable martial prowess. This suggests a culture that not only valued but actively cultivated fighting skill and military effectiveness. It really implies a regional environment where military strength was an absolutely necessary component for sovereignty and survival, where alliances were probably fluid and threats were constant.
And the Japanese. They sound quite formidable on the seas, almost legendary in their reputation for naval power, according to the Codex.
The Japanese maintained a truly fierce reputation for their maritime raids, particularly in their interactions with Chinese vessels. The Codex specifically showcased their superiority in combat against the Chinese. It was so significant, the text says, that it instilled fear in their opponents.
Wow.
This speaks volumes about their naval power, maybe advanced shipbuilding for the time, and definitely aggressive expansion tactics. It indicates they were a dominant force in the maritime sphere, capable of projecting power far beyond their shores, essentially controlling crucial trade routes and coastal regions, partly through sheer intimidation. And Champa, another place mentioned, was also famed for its piracy and plundering activities.
So a lot of conflict on the water.
Definitely. It further illustrates the prevalence of maritime conflict and, well, economic opportunism in the region, where naval strength translated directly into political and economic leverage.
Now here's where it gets particularly interesting and quite grim, illustrating the stark realities of conflict in this era. Some of these war customs were incredibly brutal, like those described for the Sambal people.
Indeed, the Codex does not hold back on these details at all. The Sambal people are explicitly described as engaging in brutal and gruesome warfare practices, removing the heads of enemies as trophies.
Headhunting.
Headhunting, yes. And it wasn't just depicted as an act of violence, it was framed as a profound cultural ritual. Similarly, the Dan Shui inhabitants had their own unique customs regarding war trophies, including ceremonial treatment of enemy heads.
Ceremonial treatment.
That's what the text says. These details paint a vivid, if grim, picture of ancient warfare, where victory wasn't just about gaining territory or subjugating people, but often involved highly ritualized and brutal displays of power and dominance over the defeated. The collection and ceremonial treatment of heads, it underscores the profound cultural significance attached to victory. They served as potent symbols of prowess and, simultaneously, represented the ultimate dehumanization of enemies in certain cultural contexts. It's a stark reminder of the very different moral landscapes surrounding warfare in this period.
And the idea of exacting tribute. That seems to be a common thread among powerful rulers across these societies, a clear and often brutal sign of who was dominant and who was subservient in the regional power dynamics.
Yes, exactly. As we mentioned with Kakundono, whose military might allowed him to invade Korea and exact tribute, effectively turning them into a tributary state. The text also mentions independent kingdoms previously not under tribute, which directly implies this constant struggle for dominion. It was a dynamic geopolitical landscape where states were continually attempting to expand their spheres of influence, either through military conquest or just coercion.
Right.
The relationship between China and the Tartars, for example, is described as fraught and antagonistic. The Tartars are explicitly called the greatest enemies of the Chinese, and King Hongbu is credited with expelling them from China. This highlights a long, often violent history of conflict and rivalry that shaped the very boundaries and identities of these powers. It really illustrates how tribute and territorial control were just inextricably linked to military strength back then.
And then there's the harsh reality of debt and slavery, a system that seems to have trapped individuals and even whole generations in this cycle of servitude.
The Codex details these strict customs governing slavery due to debts. And this wasn't merely about legal punishment for a crime, it was an entrenched social and economic system. Individuals could apparently become enslaved for surprisingly minor offenses, or simply for the inability to pay fines, or even, as the text says, as a direct result of familial debts inherited from their parents or ancestors.
Inherited debt leading to slavery.
Yes, which could lead to generational enslavement, where the status was just passed down to offspring. It reveals a really stark social consequence of economic hardship and a rigid system of justice or punishment where one's status could be permanently altered and inherited. It paints a grim picture of limited social mobility and the severe impact of economic vulnerability on personal freedom and the autonomy of entire families. Even a simple debt could potentially lead to a lifetime or even an inherited legacy of servitude.
Finally, there's this truly unique and frankly chilling practice described right at the end of the section, amok. The sheer desperation or maybe courage it embodies is just striking. It leaves a powerful impression.
This is a really powerful and very specific detail from the Codex, a truly unique cultural response to extreme circumstances. The text states, they often become amok. They become amok when they face death.
Become amok.
Right. It then describes a ritualistic self-sacrifice. They bleed themselves and then mix this blood with. Now, the sentence, as presented in the source material we have, actually leaves us with an incomplete description of what the blood is mixed with.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it still powerfully conveys this image of a final, defiant act. This act of running amok, as it's more commonly known today, emphasizes an extreme form of courage, perhaps desperation, or maybe even a psychological break in the face of certain death.
So not just suicide.
No, it seems distinct. It's portrayed as a culturally understood ritual, where an individual facing insurmountable odds or perhaps unbearable dishonor chooses to inflict as much damage as possible on their enemies before their own inevitable demise. It transforms a hopeless situation into a final, defiant act of agency. And often, it seems, a last, desperate assertion of honor. It really speaks to a cultural understanding of death that could involve such profound, self-destructive, and ritualized expressions of defiance.
Wow. Okay, we've navigated a truly fascinating journey through the Boxer Codex, haven't we? Exploring this rich tapestry of cultures from the, rigid imperial ceremonies of China to the really nuanced spiritual beliefs of the Tagalogs and the fierce independence of the Japanese.
It's been quite a ride.
We've seen how societies were structured, how families lived day to day, and how conflicts were waged. All while trying to keep in mind that crucial historical lens, the perspective through which these observations were made. It's truly been a panoramic view of a distant time, reminding us that the past is far more diverse and far more complex than we often imagine.
Indeed. And this deep dive, it isn't just about accumulating historical facts, is it? It's about understanding the incredible diversity of human experience and, crucially, the importance of critically examining the stories we inherit from the past. It shows us how cultures adapt to their environments, how power shifts and is maintained through all sorts of different means, military, economic, symbolic, and how deeply intertwined belief systems are with daily life, shaping everything from family structures and economic practices right down to how warfare is conducted.
Right.
It underscores that what might seem foreign or even bizarre to us today was simply the lived reality of countless individuals back then, shaped by their unique historical, geographical, and cultural contexts.
So as you reflect on these ancient societies, their intricate customs, their struggles, their enduring beliefs, maybe consider this.
Yeah.
What elements of their complex social contracts, their spiritual connections to the environment, or their interpretations of power still resonate today? Or perhaps even challenge our understanding of the world now?
That's a good question.
How much has truly changed in the fundamental human experience, do you think? And what echoes from the past, from societies like these described in the Boxer Codex, still shape our present, even if we don't always recognize them?